Lingua Brutalica is a podcast that uses ethnographic interviews to study language use in the extreme metal community. We are studying a music scene known for its love of themes and topics generally considered offensive, and it is likely that some episodes will touch on topics or opinions some listeners may find tasteless or ethically problematic. Ethnographic researchers aim to adopt the interviewee's point of view so that we can draw out and study the attitudes, beliefs, and practices that are important to them. We want to make it clear that in presenting these conversations here, we do not endorse any of their content. Our aim is to explore the thought processes behind language use in this long-running, international, and yet understudied scene. Hey everyone, welcome back to Lingua Brutalica. In today's episode, we speak with Rory Lane, former drummer and lyricist of Set on End, who were based in Auckland when they were still in operation. Thanks for being with us, Rory.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
It's great. So before we begin, I should explain that this interview is going to be a bit different because although we're once again speaking with someone with experience in the New Zealand metal scene, this time we're speaking to someone whose band is no longer actively playing. So we're hoping to use this interview to gain a different perspective on lyric writing in metal that comes from looking back retrospectively at what it was like to write lyrics for the band when it was in operation, and also discuss your views on your lyrics and metal in general that might have changed over time, particularly since you've been out of the game, as you said.
Yeah, no, that all sounds good. Yeah, it could be a bit of an interesting angle there. Yep.
Yeah, well, particularly as we'll get into, I think this is the first time that we're speaking to a drummer who's also a lyricist. So, a few different viewpoints that are new for us today.
Definitely. Yep, something different.
So fundamentally, how would you describe Set on End's music? What kind of genre of metal would you say that it fell under?
We always referred to it as progressive melodic groove metal was kind of the pigeonhole we kind of shoved it into. I mean, it's all debatable. Some people used to call us gent, which is a moniker that we didn't completely embrace. We kind of thought it was a bit reductive. So yeah, I mean, it's always hard to kind of, what genre do you fall into, taking all your various interests. I mean, some people might have called us new metal, but we kind of thought we're a bit too heavy for that sort of label. So yeah, we always just described that as sort of melodic, progressive groove metal. Yeah.
And what was the issue with the gent label? So you said it was a bit reductive. How so?
Well, I mean, the word itself, I guess, is just it's just describing the guitar tone as far as so it's not giving the full picture, and it also applied to a lot of the post Meshuggah bands that kind of influence from Meshuggah and kind of new twist on it. Now, while we did have maybe some influence from Meshuggah and those kind of bands, it wasn't really what we were going for. So yeah, but we had other musicians say that, that wasn't a fair label for us either. So it wasn't just us rejecting it, thankfully.
No, I definitely didn't feel like if I were to label your band from what I heard, I would not call it gent. I'm surprised that label got attached, actually.
Yeah.
Well, just the occasional comment, not, nothing.
So how did you first get into metal music personally? Were you into this sort of melodic style when you first started, or was it kind of something you gradually found yourself approaching?
I was pretty much into it straight away from a very young age. I remember being sort of preteen, and I didn't really like music at all, really. I'd listened to a few bands over the years, bit of Pearl Jam, bit of Pink Floyd, stuff like this, but I hadn't really found anything that I really felt like I represented me or that I could associate with until I found bands like Deftones and Tool. Back in the day, those were kind of the first bands me and a few of my bandmates were into. There were also other bands I was into, such as Primus and a few others. And it kind of just, it was just a bit of an evolution from there. We kind of got on the Limp Bizkit train. Me and guitarist used to play in a different band called Unleash when we were 13, 14, and we were playing Limp Bizkit, Deftones, that kind of thing. But as time went on and there was kind of this explosion of sort of new wave metal, really started finding those bands that we could really say like, yeah, this is what we're into.
And when you were first starting to get into metal, like, did you pay attention to the lyrics at that stage, or is this something that you kind of got interested in later?
I did with certain bands like Tool. I really respect the way they were kind of telling this sort of enigmatic sort of narrative, and I was wondering like, what is this song about? You know, what is this? It felt like kind of like a puzzle you've got to figure out. So I remember that kind of being the first lyrics I really appreciated. But in general, probably not. It was probably more just about the music. Obviously, heavier being very instrumentally sort of driven. So it was more just about how it made you feel overall. But the lyrics always felt like when they were good, it always felt like something like just an added sort of component to the entire thing, like that helped build the sort of themes that band was going for. So it was always important once I began noticing it, but from the very beginning, yeah, probably not.
What do you feel made a lyrics good? Like, what do you feel made them stand out from, say, the bad metal lyrics?
Probably just I guess just the flow of it, really, just how it locks into the music, how it forms part of that rhythm. Because from my perspective, it was always the patterns that have got to be right first before the actual lyrics. So it was more just about how it sounded, almost as like a percussive sort of instrument. And so that was the first thing I would always respect with the lyric writing, is just how it functioned as an instrument within that band. But then also once I started reading lyrics and sort of really analyzing it, it was the lyrics that really spoke to me were the ones that had a good flow. It almost read like a poem kind of thing. And also what they're trying to say with the lyrics, the themes at play, that kind of thing. I wasn't big on the kind of, theatrical sort of deathcore sort of lyrics, where it's kind of, telling this obscure, brutal sort of horror story. I wasn't so much into that kind of thing, but more the bands that I could tell were trying to tell some sort of story, but it wasn't always clear what that story is. So that was part of the interest, I guess, is figuring out what exactly these bands were trying to say.
And like, I suppose by contrast, like, have there been any lyrics that you've seen or that, you've heard that you've found to be like really off-putting, or, ones that you didn't think like really suited the music, or otherwise just, I suppose, weren't good?
I wouldn't go as far to say not good. I mean, I guess each to their own. Everyone has their different tastes and their different style. I do remember we used to have a good laugh reading Cannibal Corpses. The sheer brutality, like, you've got to respect it for the sort of extreme nature of it. But as for not really liking it or something like that, I wouldn't go that far. It just wasn't really my thing, I guess.
You mentioned that you view the lyrics and the vocals more of like as a percussive instrument, which is like certainly a comment we've heard before. But you're also saying that it's really important, to view the kind of relationship between the lyrics and the song, so that the rhythms match up and things like that. Is that a perspective that comes from your experience as a drummer, do you think?
Yes, partially. I mean, I think it's just sort of an intrinsic part of heavier music, simply because the lyrics are more of a background instrument, usually anyway, whereas the guitar or the drums is kind of leading the rhythm and the melody. So yeah, it kind of just came about from that. But I think my natural abilities as a drummer, that definitely helps propel me into writing those lyrics, because it did definitely feel like a natural extension of that. And in the same way that my approach to writing drums would be like, okay, we need to kind of weave this in and out of the rhythm and the guitar and the bass. And I took that same approach with the lyrics. So, making sure at this moment, the lyrics are meeting the guitar or drums, but in this moment, it's not. In this moment, we're having dead space. In this moment, we're not. So it definitely did feel like a natural extension of my drumming. But I mean, it's not a requirement, obviously, but yeah.
So when did you first actually start like writing your own lyrics? When was the first time you tried to like write lyrics for a metal song?
It was probably our EP Means to an End. I think that was the first time I actually delved in. I was always a bit of a writer. I used to write poetry when I was younger, and science fiction short stories and things like that. And yeah, so probably Means to an End, our EP, was the first time I was actually writing for a metal song. I'm sure I'd written a few songs at school before then in music class, but yeah, that was the first foray into metal. Yep.
How did it come about that you, instead of the singer, were the one that was going to write the lyrics?
It was just a matter of natural abilities, really. I think um, we just wanted to get the best product we could out there and have the best lyrics and that kind of thing. And the guys were all on board with the themes and stuff that I was writing about. So it was all, and we all took part in it as well. It wasn't just me doing it start to finish. I'd basically bring the guys the skeleton of it, and we'd discuss it, and the guys would make little changes here and there, and would basically come to an agreement about what the song's going to be about and that kind of thing. But yeah, my background is definitely more towards writing. I have a degree in creative writing, not that that means anything. And nowadays I'm using my writing ability. So it all just kind of fell into place. We just wanted to get the best product out there that we possibly could, I guess. Yeah.
Mm. And like, do you find that your approach to lyric writing was different because you were coming from, the place of being a drummer? Like, I don't know, did you write the drums first and then write, lyrics and stuff to match, or what was the process like?
Yeah, so it was pretty much lyrics last, really. We'd write the song, but then what we'd do, because there would be certain moments by the end of it, we would be, wonder, oh, that riff isn't really popping, what's going on there? But then, so we would sometimes start writing lyrics at that point, and would actually find, wow, that riff actually sounds damn good now with that sort of, with those lyrics going over it. But my approach was basically, patterns first. So basically I'll be listening to the song and I'll be like, yeah, da, 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 or something like that, just to get the feel of it. And then I'd start writing the lyrics to that pattern. But I mean, there were other times as well where I went into the song knowing what I wanted to write about, having some sort of the skeleton of the words, and then sort of conforming it into those patterns that I thought were the best. And we would have many discussions at band practice about, oh, we need a 2-syllable word there instead of a 3-syllable word. So thesaurus and dictionary, and trying to find the words that would fit in and make that pattern really pop. Yeah, so it was kind of a mixed bag of processes there. Yeah.
And I suppose, how would you say that your writing process has changed over time? Have there been any kind of significant shifts over your time at Set on End and since?
I think there was a bit of a shift between our EP and the album. I think I really managed to improve sort of that poetic writing, those poetic writing skills there, because I feel like in the EP I was still, it was my formative years, kind of finding my feet with how this all works, how I'm doing it, what are the things I want to talk about. And yeah, I really felt like on the album there was a solid progression into just sort of improving the narrative of the story of the song, of the sort of poetic devices I was using there, like the repetition, the rhyme, the alliteration, that kind of thing. Really knuckling down in the editing process to really make it as complicated as possible, as well as conveying the message. So I think there was quite a jump between those two bits of content.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying definitely matches up with some of the observations that we made that we'll definitely be talking about. But something else we wanted to ask about is just, in between the time, between finishing up with Set on End and now, has your view on, your music and metal music more generally changed, or has it kind of remained consistent across all this time?
No, not really. No, I still love my metal. It hasn't really changed. There's probably a couple of things in the Means to an End EP that I cringe at a little bit, because I guess your mindset changes and the things you care about changes over time. But it's all part of the process. So I wouldn't say there's any regrets or anything. No, I still stand by a lot of the things that I wrote about, especially in the album, definitely.
Do you miss writing for a metal band?
Yeah, no, I do definitely. Just the form of the writing, the fact that it's writing a song and it's it was a throwback to my early years of writing when I was just writing poetry at school or whatever. And but yeah, there's just something really satisfying about, because you're kind of constrained by the song structure and the patterns and all that kind of thing. So making it work in the sense of, telling a good narrative while also having it sound sort of audibly appealing. Yeah, there's something very satisfying about when you can kind of just make it all work. Like, it's definitely a unique art form that sort of nothing else could compare to, I guess.
Do you think you could still get that same satisfaction if you were writing, say, lyrics for a folk band or a rock band or a rap band or like a pop band? Or does there something specific about metal lyrics that kind of gives you that the sense of satisfaction you're talking about and challenge?
Well, probably just from the sense that it's my preferred form of music. So I guess, listening back to it, appreciating it, yeah, I guess the level of respect is kind of right up there compared to anything else. But I mean, by that same token, yeah, I'm sure I could be satisfied writing other stuff. I've written a few sort of joke rap songs and a few other things over the years, like just for a laugh. But yeah, I don't think anything could really compare to writing for metal, simply because it's ticking all the boxes of those things I care about. Yeah, definitely.
So is that as to say, like, I mean, do you think that if you were to, just view a series of lyrics and stuff without actually hearing the accompanying music, would you be able to identify them as being uniquely metal lyrics?
It is possible. I guess it depends on the buzz of the band. Obviously something like Cannibal Corpse, you're going to read, you're going to be like, oh, this is probably extreme death metal or whatever. But then you never know, right? Because there's other sort of progressive metal bands I listen to, and you could read their lyrics and, hey, it could be a rock song, it could be a pop song, it could be anything. So I'd say for the most part, it's hard to tell. But once you start getting into those more extreme genres, I think it would be pretty obvious. Yeah.
Have you personally ever, when you're writing your own lyrics, stopped to be like, oh, that just isn't very metal. I gotta say that in a different way?
Occasionally, we didn't really stick to those kind of conventions because we just wanted to tell stories, basically. But there were definitely times where it would be like, oh, that word sounds a bit too soft for that moment, kind of thing. So we would veer more towards words that sound kind of a bit more aggressive, or just the way they play out. Yeah, because obviously, even if the theme we're using may be positive, I mean, it's not going to be all about peace and love, basically. So definitely need kind of a hard edge to it. So there were times we would go back, change the lyrics. What's a more, look up the thesaurus again, what's a more brutal word that kind of conveys that same meaning, things like that. Yeah.
What makes a word soft, I suppose?
Just in terms of the syllable sounds and how it would kind of sound when it was screamed, basically. Yeah, so can't even think of an example off the top of my head, but yeah, I do remember there were some words where, or just some phrasing where it's like, can we give that a bit more of a hard edge? Can we sort of toughen that up, I guess, just to make it fit the music more?
And did that kind of stuff, like, did those changes happen, more when you were writing for the album? Because I heard that at that time you weren't actually playing with the band. Is that right?
Yeah, I left not long before the album hit.
Yeah. So I mean, what was it like, writing the lyrics for music that you weren't actually going to be playing? Like, did you find that you were encountering more of that kind of need to, change things to suit, music that you weren't yourself like involved with, or was it the same?
Well, we did play many of those songs for years. Yeah, all except two of them we were playing. We were playing on the circuit for quite a number of years. So the development process was occurring all throughout, and I had that time to make all those small little improvements before the album was going to be released. Yeah. So didn't really affect it because I was pretty familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
You mentioned a few times about telling stories with your lyrics. Some research in metal has argued that there's like some metal artists take kind of a distance from their lyrics. Cannibal Corpse being an example where they position themselves as just entertainment, not be taken seriously. Is that something that you align with, or do you feel that your stories are things that have messages that you kind of want to convey to your audience? And has your opinion on this changed over time?
No, my opinion probably hasn't changed, and yeah, there were definitely things we were trying to say with our lyrics for sure. Yeah, but I mean, I still tried to leave it so there was some room for interpretation, basically. So I wanted to make it so that someone else could read this and they might take something completely different from it than what I was trying to say. Just by leaving sort of enough vagueness in there to leave it open to interpretation. But there were definitely some rock solid messages we were trying to hit home with, definitely.
Did those messages come like when you first started writing, or is it something that kind of appeared as you put the lyrics down on the page?
It depends, really. There were a couple of songs where I was just writing it based on the ideal patterns and fitting words to that, and sort of I'd have to decide what it was about kind of halfway through. Like, what is this about? Where should I veer this kind of story sort of thing? But then there were other times where I had a sort of rock solid sense of what I wanted it to be about from the very beginning. And I would sort of write everything to sort of conform to that idea. So it just depends on what worked on the day, basically.
So speaking about your lyrics, we noticed that across both the EP and the more recent album, there's a pretty consistent focus on difficulties faced by humanity through the experience of suffering, change, and development, these kinds of things. And many of your songs seem to also reference the idea that humanity is being deceived or distracted from reality in some way. So, for instance, in Victim lines, read things like, you toe the line between realms of childish fantasy, near insanity. I cannot believe you can't fucking see your own tragedy. And in The Last Revelation, you have a witness to a world enslaved, transfixed to the screen, sick, altered reality. Then off, the album, there's a song Endeavor that talks about being done with deception and awaking with clarity. Is this a kind of theme that you intended to develop across, the EP and the album? And, if so, like, what inspired you to explore this theme?
Yeah, basically it's just, it's about the complicated political world that we're faced with and all the challenges and everything. And sort of, it definitely was a theme that we carried throughout a lot of our songs. And it's, it wasn't really about anything specific, but more about just embracing the complicated and the messed up realities of humanity, but trying to remain sort of strong in the face of it and not letting it get you down, and sort of developing that mindset where you can understand those complexities and embrace them and sort of embrace life without, getting depressed, basically. So I guess it was just about developing mental fortitude in the face of the messed up world, basically.
What was kind of your initial inspiration for choosing that as a major theme in the lyrics that you wrote?
Well, it was just we would follow along with politics and world events and that kind of thing, and it was, we're all kind of powerless in our lives, aren't we? Like in a way, in the face of these kind of big issues that we don't have much control over. So I guess it was just our way of getting the word out there that or just getting that message out there that this stuff is happening and we should be paying attention to it. We were always sort of semi-political. It's just naturally sort of the way that we pushed ourselves there. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you say that because, as you might have heard, like a discussion that we kind of keep having with a lot of musicians is, what the role of political speech is within metal lyrics, because you might know there's kind of these two schools of thought that keep appearing, like where on the one hand people say that metal should be devoid of any kind of political discourse,
And on the other, people saying that, well, it's important to be aware of, current political issues that are affecting people around the world, and that should be incorporated into lyrics. How do you feel about this, dichotomy in ways of viewing the relationship between politics and song lyrics?
Well, I would probably just say, write about whatever you want to write about, basically. I mean, it's all art, it's all open to interpretation. And I did feel like the way we did it, it was kind of vague. We're not going out there and saying, support this political party or anything silly like that. I would say that would be going too far if you're actually sort of grandstanding about these issues and being very specific about it. But personally, I have no problem with bands sort of veering into that political territory. A lot of my favorite bands offer commentary on similar things to what we talk about. So yeah, it's right up my avenue, basically.
Is there a line like, for instance, a band like Rage Against the Machine or something like that? Do they go? Would you say that's too explicit, or are they able to do it in a way that still maintains that sort of poetic feel that you're saying is important?
No, I think they did it pretty well, because I mean their entire deal is built around that. I mean, it's in the name, Rage Against the Machine. So they've obviously gone extreme with their political messaging, but hey, I mean that worked for them, didn't it? So they got them to where they were. Just whatever works. They've chosen to have that route where it's just in your face, obvious. I would say, personally, I don't agree going to those sort of extremes. Like, I prefer making it a bit more subtle, a bit more low key, a bit more sort of generic. But in saying that, whatever works. If a band, they've all got the same political viewpoints and they want to get their message out there, then why not?
One other kind of persistent contrast or theme that we noted in your lyrics is about like towing the line versus and being a cog in the machine, are two lines that appear in your songs, versus like having a contrary mind or a discerning mind. And this is often kind of coupled with references to repression of truth or the silencing of voices. Your EP uses the word control quite frequently. Is this another kind of idea that you meant to explore, this idea of social control, or is that something that just kind of happened naturally with the whole clarity and kind of politics idea you had earlier?
It kind of just was a natural extension of the things we cared about and that kind of thing. It wasn't anything specific. Like, we're not talking about some grand conspiracy or anything like this, like some people believe, but it's more it's more just acknowledging the painful reality and the complexity of it, and that there is bad people out there doing bad things. That doesn't mean everything is bad, and it doesn't mean that we have to sort of embrace this morbid mindset about it. It's more about just accepting reality. It was just a natural sort of thing that we were all passionate about, that just kept working its way in there.
Seems like, is it tricky to convey all that nuance through the metal medium? Like, you have some positive phrasing in there, right? You're telling us that obviously there's these bad things going on, but it doesn't mean the world's a bad place. And earlier said that the importance of kind of staying positive and being positive. Are those themes something that you like? How did you work those themes in as well? Was it something you kind of had to struggle to fit in there? And was there any risk of, say, somebody maybe not picking up on the positivity that you also wish to convey?
Yeah, because I mean, the subject matter a lot of the time is quite dark, but would often, as you suggested, would often put little key phrases in there which are showing, like, hey, it's not all so bad, And I guess it kind of came naturally from our own mindsets, basically, because that's the sort of mental struggle that we all go through sometimes if we're, paying close attention to world events and everything. So it's probably more to do with our own personal development, and then sort of, trying to share those kind of insights with other people who may be, the world might be getting them down, and, it wasn't a conscious decision, but in retrospect, it's kind of like, well, if we can put some messaging out there that's going to make these people realize, like, hey, just keep going, you'll be okay.
So another kind of theme or motif that we picked up on was there's particularly off the EP a lot of references to Christian mythology. For instance, there's the line, "Judge lest you be judged," stemming from the Bible verse. Then there's the song "Last Revelations," or "Last Revelation," which appears to reference, the rapture described in Revelations and talks about the impacts of false prophets. So I was wondering, why did you decide to use these images and references from Christianity, and how do they relate to these other themes that we were talking about?
Yeah, well, I was basically using it against them, basically using their own words and their own themes against them. We did have a little bit of a sort of anti-religious or irrational sort of belief bent throughout some of our lyrics. Again, it just naturally comes from our own beliefs and the things we've seen and encountered over the years. We were hoping that we weren't too blatant about it. I mean, it's not a criticism of all religion or all belief, but more the extremists of those belief systems. So Fire for Amber, I mean, it's pretty obvious that there's some anti-religious sort of overtones going on in that one. Yeah, again, it's just a natural extension of the things that we were passionate about.
Did you ever have like fans come up and discuss these kind of themes with you after a show or anything like that?
Yeah, no, we did sometimes. Yeah, would have people come up and say, "Oh, I love the lyrics to this song, rah, rah, rah." We've got a few emails and messages over the years. So we definitely seem to have struck the chord with some people for sure.
Did you ever have anyone completely misinterpret what you were trying to say?
No, not that I can remember. No.
Oh, okay. So everyone kind of got your message, it seems?
I'm not sure if we ever had conversations that were that specific, to be honest. It was just it was probably just quick fan interaction. Love your lyrics, rah, 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 love the song. Yeah, I can't remember.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Going back to the references to Christianity, it's interesting that this appears just because obviously metal has a kind of notoriously complex and often kind of contentious relationship with religion, Christianity especially. Do you think that the use of Christian references impacts like the metal feel of the lyrics in any way?
Well, it kind of suits it a little bit because it's got that kind of I guess archaic sort of grandiose wording that you often see in religious texts and that kind of thing, and I think it does sort of transplant onto metal quite well, definitely.
Why do you think that's so? Why do you think that grandiose kind of feel works so well with metal?
It's probably something to do with the hugeness of metal, I'd guess, just because it's, I don't know, it's hard to describe. There's some similarities between opera music, classical music, and metal, and they also have those kind of those big sort of epic sort of lyrics going on. That would be my guess. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Like in the sense that it's theatrical?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just
right.
It's just huge, just like the music, I guess. That would probably be the best way to describe it. It's epic. It's not in our current lexicon, so it's kind of got that edge of mystery to it as well, and open to interpretation, harking back to yesteryear. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how that kind of correlates with metal, but that's the sense I get anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a comment that we've heard before is that, people wanting to use language that's different from the language that you typically see in everyday interaction.
Yeah.
So is that kind of like what you're getting at, like wanting to use words, phrases, references that kind of take you away from kind of everyday linguistic situations?
Yeah, definitely. Something we used to talk about quite a bit is the idea of crafting the enigma, basically, and so the lyrics would be an important part of that. So I mean, adding the subtext by the language that you're using, the things that you're referring to, it's just adding another layer of complexity of it and mystery to it that interests people, get people more involved in what you're doing and that kind of thing. Yeah.
You've mentioned complexity a few times so far in this interview as something that you kind of strive for and looked for. What is it about complexity that really attracted you to as including it in part of your metal lyrics?
It's hard to say, really. It's just a matter of wanting to make it as good as possible, basically. And when I say complexity, I more mean like the poetic devices I'm using throughout it and that kind of thing. I mean, obviously you don't want to use these obscure words that no one's going to know what it means. So you could argue, I guess, that's sort of getting overly complicated. But then also it kind of, I think it kind of just suits the Jesse's style, how it was being conveyed. It's quite ranty. There's lots of room for sort of lots of lyrics and certain verses and things like that. So you can really sort of pack in all the syllables there. So yeah, no, it's just about developing the product, just making it with as many layers as possible, and as complicated as possible. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that makes it better or anything, but I think in our case, it just worked with what we were doing.
So would you, if the lyrics were say more simple and straightforward, and I guess like with less layers, would that I'm not sure the exact way to phrase this, but would that reduce the quality of the ultimate product in your mind?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just case by case basis. Basically, if it works within the context of that song, then that's fine. I mean, we had songs that that were, you know, the lyrics were perhaps a little bit simpler or a little bit sort of laid back. One example I can think of is Dark Beyond, which the song which needed a bit more space to kind of work with there. Yeah, so it just depends on what's happening.
So yeah, another common theme that we saw appearing across both the EP and the album is you know, the idea of change. So there's a lot of metaphors that appear on the Dark Beyond the album that seem focused on illustrating the idea of change. For instance, there's several references to change the tide or incoming winds of change. And I think almost every song actually off the Dark Beyond references some kind of incoming change or change in progress. So I was wondering, like, are you talking about particular like kinds of change in these lyrics? And you know, why did you want to talk about change so much across the album?
Well, you know, it just seemed like a very relevant thing to sort of have in there, and it ties into what we were trying to do with the overall album. You know, it's few through the songs we talk about, you know, there's personal change, there's change more on a humanity scale, there's emotional change. It's an intrinsic part of survival, I guess, and you know, tolerating this existence, I suppose. So it just felt like it's probably prevalent just because it felt so relevant, really.
So I mean, do you still feel that, like, as you've gotten older, do you still feel that change is a really, really relevant theme that if you like went back to a metal band and started writing again today, you would still be involved with, or it was something that kind of attracted you in the past?
No, I'd probably try and make it a continuation of what I was writing. But again, you want to change, right? You want to try and improve, you want to progress. So I probably would look to different themes and things I'm talking about. Yeah, so that's the essence of change. Yeah, just constantly progressing.
Interesting. A lot of your theme, a lot of the lyrics on your albums, when you're talking about these things like change or like control or whatever, seem to be written as though they're addressing someone or a series of someone's. Like you have lyrics on both the EP and the album that use the pronoun you very, very commonly. In the EP, there's lyrics like, if you wrong someone, fate will trace it back to you. Do you breed the suffering and feed the pain? And in the album, you have the line, the burden weighs on you to find a way in the end. Do to others as was done to you. When you're writing your lyrics, is there someone that you're specifically imagining when you use you like this, or does the use of you have a different role in the lyrics themselves?
It sort of varies. Victim is there is specific people or types of people in mind, and you know, it's kind of, I guess it's kind of chastising them when it refers to you. But then other times we've used it, it's more the general public, I guess. It's more the general listener out there. Yeah, so it kind of it depends which song. Yeah.
So on some tracks, you is the listener.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the subject.
You said sometimes that you try to tell a story in a song. Is you ever like the person that a protagonist of the song is speaking to?
Yeah, I think so. I'd have to think of an example. Sorry, what was the second example you gave?
The second example was the burden weighs on you to find a way in the end.
Yeah, so that song is yeah, it's referring to I guess the subject of the song, but more in a positive way. So it's the listener, but it's the subject. It's suggesting of them developing sort of a tough mindset to take on the world, basically. So I guess that's, yeah, we're talking to the protagonist in that sense, I guess.
Is there any risk that the listener misunderstands themselves as you when it's not intended to be you? Like when you're addressing a specific group and the listener takes it as like everyone? Is that something that you think is possible, or is it just kind of something you can't control as a writer?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't control it. I'm sure there is many different interpretations of how they've taken it or misunderstood it. I couldn't really say.
Mm. So in the case of victim, like who's the you that you're targeting in that case? If you can give us an example.
Oh, I can't say. No, it's basically that song was about certain people you might meet out there who are quite manipulative, quite, you know, users, but also talking about how basically it ends up sabotaging their own life. You know, carrying on with this victim mindset, even though they're the aggressor, basically. Yeah, so that's essentially what that song's about. There is specific examples I could give, but yeah, I better not.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, fair. It makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just interesting you say that because, as you said, you know, there's the possibility of people interpreting that multiple different ways, and like, you know, the you there could be interpreted as like, you know, the listener. Is there anything that you do to the, you know, the surrounding lyrics around, you know, the use of the pronoun you, that you feel like makes it easier for, you know, the reader or the listener to interpret who you is in context?
Yeah, no, they definitely should be able to. But there is a couple of times I think where I kind of switch perspective.
Yeah.
So I go from first person to third person, I suppose. Yeah, so it might be a little bit more complicated for the listener then to interpret what's happening. But as far as I can tell, that's just adding to that enigma, I guess, and making it more of a puzzle that they can figure it out. And there might be a time where they realize, oh, actually, it's kind of switched perspective there, and now it's back to talking about I or rather than you and that kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah, I remember I did used to change perspectives quite a bit. And yeah, I mean, if it confuses someone out there, that's kind of part of the intention, to be honest.
Okay.
So you said like sometimes when you use you are thinking of like a particular person or type of person. When you're using I, is that ever you, or is that also just a representative of, you know, a protagonist or, you know, a particular kind of perspective?
It can be us, because as I said before, a lot of these themes and stories we're trying to tell were based on our own struggles and our own experiences. So it definitely can be applied to us. But then we were also thinking of it that it just applies to a sort of generalized sort of protagonist, which could be the listener as well. So it could just be us, it could just be them, or it could be both. Just depends on how you want to interpret it.
Okay. In looking at both your EP and your album, we noticed a number of differences. And you mentioned this at the very, very start of the interview that you kind of approach them differently. But we were wondering, one thing is that the EP involves a lot of terms that I guess you'd call a bit more straightforward. For instance, the opening lines for Fire for Amber are, may all your selfish prayers remain unheard. Just pray is not fire for Amber. Why care about there when here there's hell to pay? Which are all terms that say the average kind of listener would be expected to be familiar with. Was it a conscious choice to use straightforward lyrics on this EP, or was it something that kind of happened because it was your first try? Like you mentioned that you tried to make them more complex on the album. Was that just, I guess, starting out writing, or was it that you wanted really specifically to have straightforward lyrics on this first EP?
No, there wasn't really any solid thought process behind it at that stage. There was more so on the album. It was more just writing lyrics, what fits here, what I want to talk about. And yeah, the pattern was always taking precedent over the actual words at that stage. So whether I mean, some of the messaging in that EP is, kind of pretty straightforward. But hey, I mean, I guess there's nothing wrong with that. It just depends on what you're into, and it was all part of my development process. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course we can see that there's like considerably more, what we might call complex vocabulary, on the latest album. The line "regressive recidivist without restraint" is a key example. So we're wondering, is that, I suppose, something that you wanted to develop, to kind of fit the themes that we were talking about earlier? I mean, you said that, you generally kind of prefer more complex songwriting and, lyrical choices. Is this something that you think kind of adds to the discussion of these kind of more complex ideas and themes that you're developing on the album as well?
Yeah, I think it definitely did. It was both conscious and unconscious. I mean, my skills were probably improving as well, and my writing style with that kind of thing was probably improving. So it was probably just a natural development, but I definitely did sort of knuckle down and really focus on swapping out syllables and words to try and improve it, make it more complicated. And that line you brought up, regressive recidivist without restraint, I mean, to me, that's a good example of how I've used more complicated vocabulary, but in my mind, it sounds more aggressive, and it's got that alliteration sound between regressive recidivists. So, and once you hear it screamed by Jesse, I mean, yeah, it just seems to pop to me. It sounds better than if I'd swapped it out with more simpler language. So yeah, I think, general rule, more complexity, more aggressive sounding words or bigger words is better. But I mean, it's not the rule. I mean, there are no rules really. But in those kind of cases, I definitely felt like it was a good evolution of what we were doing.
Well, was there a specific event or inspiration that made you say, all right, I'm going to write a bit more complex on this new album? Like, did you encounter something that made you start thinking, okay, I got to do this?
No, it was more just about putting out the best content that we possibly could. And I remember I spent way more time on it, just dwelling on these lyrics and trying different things, different patterns, different words, listening to it in my car every day to and from work, taking notes on my phone or whatever. Yeah, so it definitely was intentional. There wasn't really a reason for it beyond just trying to make it as good as it possibly could be.
One other kind of word and change that I noticed between the albums, and maybe I'm reading things into this way too much. If so, just let me know. But on the EP, the word hate appears a lot. It's on over half the tracks. It appears multiple times, but in the album, it doesn't appear at all. Is this just by chance, or does this reflect maybe different mindsets that you were in when working on the album versus the EP? Because I know there are a number of years in between the two.
Not so well. I guess it is about developing mindset in a way, but basically within the EP and to a greater extent within the album, I was trying to link up a lot of the lyrics and the themes between songs to sort of develop this more coherent sort of overarching theme to the entire thing. So obviously in the EP we were often talking about, well, I think we always talked about hate sort of as a negative thing, as a bad thing, that, you don't want to fall into that kind of negative mindset. Yeah, so we just carried that as sort of a theme throughout the EP, and then there were kind of different themes and different repetitions that we used within the album, but we were trying to sort of achieve that same thing.
Interesting. So you had the changes you made between the albums were not just in terms of the complexity that was going on, but also the kind of linking between the songs.
Yeah, it's basically we designed it as sort of a narrative, but it's a mixed up narrative. It doesn't go from start to finish through the songs, but there's many linkages, words and phrases and themes that go from one to the other, like sort of on a time spectrum. Basically overall the album was the story of mankind. I mean, we start way back in the primordial ooze, and then we work our way up to mankind's aspirations in space, basically. So yeah, it was meant to be this sort of story of mankind, and basically we dwelled in the present for a little bit as well, and talked about some of the issues facing our world, and then we wanted to really give like sort of different scenarios for what might happen in the future if we sort of start behaving ourselves, basically.
Yeah, another kind of key difference that we observed across the EP and the album is one that you've already mentioned yourself, the use of alliteration and rhyme. So although there are a couple of instances of rhyme on the EP, lyrics of the album involve considerably more instances of rhyme appearing in different rhyming schemes. So for instance, on Change the Tide, there's a series of rhyming lines that goes, change the tide, the path is set, the truth aligns to reignite the fires of discerning minds. Whereas in Claw at the Throne, there's a disgraceful masquerade, only steps to take, reclaim the rightful pride of place, giving all there is to trade, giving all this for petty change. And there's a few instances of rhyme that's even combined with that alliteration, as we see, in examples like speculative supremacy liquidates forgotten states, or repetition, as in build the bones we created, build up the profile of those segregated. So we were wondering, what made you decide to incorporate all of these kind of complex rhyming schemes and wordplay more extensively in the lyrics of the album? What specifically do these kind of wordplay features add to your lyrical content?
Yeah, well, it's a pretty hard thing to quantify, but as far as I could tell, it just creates more sort of general flow within the song. I mean, half the time listening to the screamer scream the lyrics, you won't even be conscious of those rhymes a lot of the time. But if you really analyze it, it just makes everything flow a bit better, or at least that's what I thought going into it. So that's when I really started knuckling down and trying to make the rhyming, alliteration, and repetition sort of as complicated as possible, but still tasteful. I remember there was moments where I had a rhyme and it's like, 3 lines and it's just rhyming the last word, and it's like, oh, that's too simple, don't do that. So get rid of that last line, make that last line so it doesn't even rhyme, or make it so that it's rhyming in the middle of the sentence, or things like that. Yeah, so I mean, it's all debatable, right? It's language, but in my mind, there was just some sort of X factor. It sort of gives the music and the lyrics, and it just adds to that overall package, and just helps create that groove and that flow within it.
Did your singer Jesse ever give you any feedback on these kind of changes? Like, did he ever say, "Oh man, I really like this alliteration, this rhyme. You mentioned it sounds more aggressive." Did he ever? It's like, "Oh, I can make this more aggressive. This is, it feels better when I sing it," or was it those kind of discussions not really happening?
Yeah, no, they were definitely happening every step of the way. Basically, the boys were always giving me feedback, and Jesse was as well, making small changes here and there. There were certain lines and phrases that those guys wrote, and I was completely open to it because it's a team effort. And obviously I don't want to steal everyone's thunder, so I wanted to be open to changes and sort of developing it. So yeah, it really was a team process at the end of it all. I would just come to them with kind of the bones of it, and then we'd all kind of develop it from there. Yeah, but no, there were definitely things that Jesse contributed over the years, for sure.
So did you feel that definitely like the amount of time you spent in was something that the other members of the band noticed?
Oh yeah, no, they were definitely digging what I was coming up with, and we're all of similar mindsets. So yeah, there was some pretty solid agreement on the things we were talking about, the things we were looking at. Yeah, I think the guys really did like the way our lyrics went, for sure.
Did you ever have like a conversation with Jesse where he sat down and said, like, look, before I sing this, I need to know like more about what the song's about?
Yeah, no, the guys would always ask me, because some of the more vague ones where I'm using more metaphors and things like that. Yeah, sometimes there would be like, yeah, it's clear in my mind because I wrote the thing, but obviously because I've designed it to be ambiguous to some extent. Yeah, there were definitely times where the boys were like, what does that line mean? Right. But usually once I explained it, they were 100% on board. Like, yeah, awesome. Why not?
Okay. So, but he definitely wanted to know before he sang.
Yeah, and I remember Jesse as well, saying things like there were certain songs where he sort of thought about it from more a personal angle, interpreted the lyrics in kind of a different way than I did, because he felt like, oh, that resonated more with him, and sort of made him more passionate about it. Which was, I was absolutely happy with that, because that's exactly what my intention was with the lyrics, so it was absolutely fine.
And did they have any difficulties? Like, did Jesse have any difficulties getting around, like, the changing rhyming schemes? This is something that definitely, like, jumped out at me. It's something that you mentioned yourself, right? That you didn't want to use like a predictable rhyming scheme. Was this something that he found difficult to kind of translate when he was actually producing the vocals?
At times it was, definitely. Probably the main struggle was the fact that I'm just writing them. I don't have to scream them. You know what I mean? I'm packing in just so many words, so many syllables. And yeah, poor Jesse would be like, man, where do I breathe in this thing? Like, yeah, there was some difficulties there. So we would make adjustments along the way. I'd be like, there's not enough of a gap between this verse and this chorus, and that chorus has got a big long scream at the start, so we need some energy for that. So we'd figure out what to do, and would say, all right, the last verse note, don't hold that as long, or we'll change it, or whatever, just to, the logistics of actually screaming it. But in terms of the rhyming and that kind of thing, I think it made it easier to memorize. I'm not sure about that, but simply the fact that it's kind of like a little song or a poem that you can work through. I'm not sure of this, but I can imagine that might make it a little bit easier to actually remember what's coming, kind of thing. Yeah.
Interesting. So we also want to ask about a few things we noted that aren't in your lyrics that I guess are kind of stereotypically found in extreme metal. And one is that while several set on end songs reference conflicts or battle, like in Iconoclast, you say another lamb, another soldier to the slaughter, like all those who stand recruited, life becomes a saunter. But we did notice that these references to conflict rarely have any overt description of like violence or gore. Is this something that you chose to avoid, or just something that you kind of never ended up touching on?
No, we kind of chose to avoid them, I guess. The examples you're talking of, it's more a metaphor, really. It's not an actual battle or thing like that. It's just a conflict that we might be using some sort of symbolism to convey. I wouldn't say we actively avoided more brutal lyrics, but I kind of cringed when you guys quoted the one swear word we had from me, because we decided after that point, like, oh, that's going too far. We don't want to do that.
Really?
Yeah, no, we just decided, as I've talked about, there's plenty of aggressive sounding words that can kind of convey that emotion without resorting to something extreme, basically. So yeah, they actually, you're right, there was a trend where we sort of actively avoided making it too extreme, because we kind of saw that as cheating in a way, kind of the easy part. Like, why can't we say this by just using more aggressive sounding words without actually resorting to blood and gore or swearing or whatever it might be? Yeah.
So you actually had a discussion about as a band about the use of fuck on that song?
Yeah, no, we did. I'm sure we did. It wasn't a big thing. It was probably me. I more decided not to do it and told the guys about it, and they're like, yeah, that sounds right. I mean, we just saw it as a little, I'm not judging other bands who do it or whatever, but just for us personally, our style, we kind of thought like, oh, hey, we're not a deathcore band or anything anyways. We don't, taking it to that level didn't really fit to us, didn't really feel right. It felt like we want to pull it back a little bit, still make it aggressive, but be a little bit reserved about it as well.
That's really interesting. So yeah, I suppose like in closing, how would you summarize the changes in your perspective on writing lyrics that have occurred, over the last decade with your involvement in Set on End, and particularly since you've, become more, moved more out of the game set? What do you think is the fundamental purpose of your lyrics, more, and perhaps more broadly, the purpose of lyrics in a genre like extreme metal? And has your view on this changed, or more so developed across that period of time?
No, it hasn't really changed, but I mean, it's yeah, it depends on the band. It depends on what they want to say. So I just personally, not that I'm criticizing, but I never dug the sort of theatrical blood and gore sort of part of metal. To me, it was more about writing something that's important to us and themes that are important to us, and messaging that we want to get out there without being sort of too overt, and that kind of thing. So that's always the approach that, well, not always, but sort of mainly in the album, that's more the approach we tried to go for. And I'd say it probably hasn't changed. Assuming I'd be writing the same type of progressive metal music, I think that just fits it quite well. So no, I think I'm sure there would be a bit of an evolution if we wrote another album, or if I wrote some sort of other metal music. I'm sure there would be a change just to fit that genre a bit more effectively. But no, I'd say I'd be writing it in a similar manner to what I always did.
Mm.
You mentioned that you're still writing in other areas. Do you feel like your time writing metal lyrics has given you skills that you can employ as a writer more broadly in general?
Oh, definitely. And even in the sense of what I'm doing now, just making videos, I can feel the sort of music structure skills coming through, the arrangement, that kind of thing. And I mean, it's all practice, isn't it? I suppose it doesn't really matter what you're writing. It's all leading you to hopefully a better skill set. So I think it's definitely contributed to my skills that I'm utilizing now, for sure.
Mm. And how do you view your lyrics now? Like, do you view them as having a particular purpose now that, now that you're not in the game anymore, and now that you're kind of like looking back on them?
No, I think it's still trying to get the same message out there. I think it still mostly applies because humanity still hasn't sorted our shit out really. So it's probably still pretty relevant, and until we start developing a better culture, I guess it always will be relevant. Well, that's what I think anyway.
Great.
Cool.
Yeah, so finally we wanted to ask you about your current project, because usually we use this kind of time to plug what the band is doing and things like that. And so we'll definitely put up some links to Set on End's music on Spotify, because it's still available there. Yeah. And perhaps also on Bandcamp, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think we're on Bandcamp, definitely.
Mm-hmm. But we also wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about what you're working on now. So if you'd like to tell us about it, we're all ears.
Oh yeah, a little bit of an aside. Yep, I'm a YouTuber nowadays. I've been doing it for full time for almost a year now. Media Zealot is the channel name if you want to check it out. It's just writing comedy and criticisms of science fiction movies and stupid villains and stuff like this. Yeah, so it's been going well.
Cool,
awesome. Yeah, we'll leave a link up to that as well.
Is there a homepage or a discussion besides, or is YouTube the main access point for that?
YouTube's the main access point for that. Yeah, Media Zealot if you want to check it out.
Cool.
Awesome. Will do. Well, thanks for spending the time with us and chatting to us. Looking back on your lyrics has been really interesting. Obviously not a perspective that we often hear. And as we've kind of like moved through the New Zealand scene, I think it's been really great to kind of like look at music in that scene from different angles and stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much. Have a lovely weekend.
Thanks, guys. You too.
Thank you for listening to Lingua Italica. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stay tuned for our next episode. Before we leave, we just wanted to acknowledge that this podcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.